Welcome to this deep dive, custom tailored for you, the learner, who seeks knowledge that is both swift and profound. Today, we are setting aside the noise of current events to focus our attention really intensely on a single, ancient, and immensely powerful text, Psalm 35.
And that's a crucial choice. Psalm 35, situated firmly in Book on the Psalter, that's Psalms 1 through 41, is often, overlooked or maybe misunderstood, particularly by modern readers who are grappling with its raw demands for judgment. It's a text that's really born from the furnace of betrayal. It gives voice to one of the most agonizing human experiences.
And that's exactly our mission today. We really need to unpack this challenging piece of scripture. Our source material, curated by the wisdom of the UNFIJ team, frames it as a critical pathway for the righteous when they're facing malice. We want to understand its complex structure, its fierce plea for divine justice, and I think most importantly, how its timeless truths apply when you are rewarded evil for good.
To truly appreciate Psalm 35, we absolutely must set the stage. This psalm, it sits within a section of Davidic writings that are just so rich with themes of suffering, messianic foreshadowing, and wisdom. It's an intensely personal document known as an imprecatory psalm.
Right.
And David is not relying on some faulty human justice system. He's asking God to step in, to be his divine military champion against enemies who have, unjustly sought his ruin.
So he's bypassing the earthly court entirely.
Completely. And the great lesson here, which the You Need Faith in Jesus team continually points toward, is that true faith is honest. It brings even the darkest, most difficult emotions, like that desire for vindication, directly into calm presence.
Okay, so we've got three distinct cycles in this song. It's almost like movements in a symphony, right? The plea, the lament, and then the promise. We'll be moving through David's legal and military language and trying to draw out some clear, practical steps for applying this cry for justice in your own life. And of course, always grounding our discussion in the authority of the word. So let's start with the central challenge, the genre itself. Okay, let's unpack that controversial term, imprecatory psalm. For a lot of listeners, I think praying for judgment or, curses on an enemy, it feels spiritually jarring. It even feels maybe contradictory to the New Testament call to love. What does this word mean in David's world, and why is it, contrary to our modern instinct, considered a righteous form of prayer?
That is the essential hurdle we have to clear. When the You Need Faith in Jesus team analyzes these texts, they emphasize this vital distinction between personal revenge and divine justice. Imprecation just means calling on God to bring judgment and curses upon enemies.
So it's an appeal, not an action.
Exactly. If David had acted on his own, using his royal power to exact revenge, that would have been self-serving, emotional, and sinful. But these psalms are explicitly not expressions of personal revenge.
So David is essentially saying, I have this emotion, this intense desire for justice, but I refuse to execute it myself because I know I'm flawed.
Precisely. It is a radical act of humility and faith. He appeals to the Supreme Court of Heaven for divine justice. It's an urgent plea for God to vindicate his own name and righteousness in a world where human justice has failed completely. David lacks the capacity and, frankly, the perfect moral standing to execute true justice. So he asks God, the righteous judge of all the earth, to intervene so that God's perfect, unimpeachable justice might be publicly displayed.
And historically, we know this fits his life. Whether he was fleeing the irrational jealousy of King Saul or dealing with that devastating internal political betrayal from his own son Absalom and his counselor Ahithophel, David was so often targeted without cause. He must have felt defenseless against this systemic, well-funded malice.
Oh, he was entirely justified in feeling persecuted. And because he was a king, his spiritual health was tied to the spiritual health of the entire nation. His vindication was necessary for God's righteous order to be reaffirmed publicly. And this commitment to having God fight his battles is immediately evident in his opening language. It's both legal and military. He wants God to plead his cause in the courtroom, and then in the very next breath, suit up for the battleground.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
Listen to the direct challenge in the King James Version of the opening verses. It really emphasizes God's dual role. Psalm 35, verse 1, KJV. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me.
That opening line, it just doesn't leave any room for neutrality, does it? It's a demand for engagement.
It is. And the requests that follow move directly into the detailed preparation for divine military action. It continues in Psalm 35, verse 2, KJV. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for mine help. And then Psalm 35, verse 3, KJV. Draw out also the spear and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation.
Let's slow down and really analyze that imagery from a military standpoint. David is asking for the shield, the buckler, and the spear. This isn't generic armor, it's highly specific. We've been trained by our sources to see deep insight in these small details. What's the significance of having two different types of shields?
This is a beautiful piece of ancient military nuance that I think translates perfectly into spiritual warfare.
Hmm.
As the source context explains, the word for shield, used here, often referred to the smaller, round shield, maybe for close quarters fighting or rapid defense and offense. Think of it as protection for personal combat.
Okay, so tactical and up close.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The buckler, however, that was the large body-size shield, what we might call massive defensive rampart. It offered full, comprehensive protection. Standing behind it meant you were completely covered.
So David is asking God to be equipped for both scenarios. The close, rapid skirmish and the full, unyielding defensive stand. It's comprehensive protection.
Absolutely. God must be ready for proactive engagement. That's the small shield. And comprehensive defense, the buckler. Then comes the spear, pulled out to stop the enemy advance, creating an unpassable divine barrier. David asks God to put on the full armor and step decisively onto the front line. It is the ultimate expression of trust in divine power.
But then, amidst all this armor and weaponry, we hit that crucial inward pivot in verse 3. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. Why is that statement delivered internally more important than the external act of taking up the spear?
Because without that internal assurance, the battle remains terrifying and overwhelming. David knows that even if God defeats his physical enemies, fear, doubt, and spiritual fatigue can still conquer him from the inside. He needs God's verbal declaration, that deep personal reassurance, to confirm that he is not merely an ally in the battle, but the actual source of the ultimate rescue. The external fight is secondary to the internal peace that comes from knowing, my soul is safe in him.
That's the anchor that allows him to proceed with faith, regardless of the immediate chaos. It allows him to hold his peace, as it were.
Precisely. And this is where the cross-reference in the Old Testament provides such profound context, something the "you need faith in Jesus" team highlights frequently when discussing divine intervention. The situation echoes that moment when Israel was trapped by the Red Sea, facing certain annihilation by the Egyptian army. Moses gave the assurance recorded for us in Exodus chapter 14, verse 14, KJV, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace."
That instruction to simply hold your peace, that must have felt impossible to the Israelites, just as surrendering control feels impossible to us when we're betrayed.
It feels impossible, but it is the prerequisite for divine intervention. It models radical surrender. When we fight, we often obstruct God's ability to act righteously. When we surrender our argument and our anger, we clear the way for the Lord of hosts.
And that leads directly to an application for us.
It does. This leads us to practical step 1 derived from this text, a foundational piece of wisdom promoted through our sources. Practical step 1, you need faith in Jesus' team focus. When opposition, betrayal, or slander arises, you have to resist that urge to immediately retaliate or obsess over self-defense or deploy your own weak weapons.
The weak weapons of argument and anger.
Exactly. Instead, immediately hand the conflict over to God. Ask him to take up the shield and spear. Your primary spiritual job is to seek that deep inner peace that confirms he is in control, waiting for him to whisper to your soul, I am thy salvation. It's a radical surrender of control rooted in confidence of divine justice.
Okay. With God now armed and ready, David moves from preparation to petition. And the petitions are fierce. He moves to execute justice against specific enemies, and the language is startling. He begins praying for these dramatic curses. We have to address the difficulty of this section head on. How does the source material frame David's request for ruin in a way that remains righteous and not just bitter?
David asks for a dramatic, concentrated reversal of fortune. That's often called lex talionis, or poetic justice. He wants their wicked plots to become entirely self-defeating traps. And the justification, as we'll see, is that the attacks are without cause.
Okay, let's hear it. This is where it gets intense.
It does. Let's hear the King James translation of this powerful call for immediate consequences. It spans verses 4 through 8, a relentless torrent of judgment requests. Psalm 35, verse 4, KJV. Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul. Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that devise my hurt. Psalm 35, verse 5, KJV. Let them be as chaff before the wind, and let the angel of the Lord chase them.
Wow.
It keeps going. Psalm 35, verse 6, KJV. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord persecute them. Psalm 35, verse 7, KJV. For without cause have they hid for me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul. And the culmination in Psalm 35, verse 8, KJV. Let destruction come upon him at unawares, and let his net that he hath hid catch himself. Into that very destruction let him fall.
That is a total, comprehensive, and humiliating defeat he is requesting. It includes external chaos, spiritual pursuit, and internal self-destruction.
Yes, and the crucial theological justification is centered right there in verse 7. Without cause have they hid for me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul. David is not asking for random retribution. He's asking for the wicked to fall into the exact trap they set for the innocent. This is a request for God's perfect righteous order to be immediately and publicly restored.
So if the malice is intentional and unprovoked, then the justice must be proportionate. Let's dig deeper into the imagery he uses here. Chaff before the wind, dark and slippery way, and the angel of the Lord chase them. That's heavy stuff.
Each image is meant to convey utter devastation. Being compared to chaff before the wind signifies absolute worthlessness and chaotic dispersal. Chaff is the light, useless husk of grain instantly scattered. David is praying for their influence, their reputation, their power to be reduced to nothingness, utterly powerless against the smallest breath of God's will.
And the dark and slippery way. That sounds like a terrifying psychological state as well as a physical punishment.
Yes, it's an existential judgment.
Yeah.
It suggests an inescapable, horrifying fate where they lack both clarity, which is the darkness, and stability, the slippery ground.
Yeah.
They can't see where they're going, and they have no grip on their environment, ensuring they stumble and fall into the very pits they dug. This judgment leaves them entirely helpless.
And then the ultimate pursuit, the angel of the Lord.
That is perhaps the most solemn aspect. Calling upon the angel of the Lord is asking for the unstoppable personal force of the divine to intervene. In the Old Testament, this figure is often a manifestation of God himself, deployed with irresistible power. David isn't just praying for a lightning strike. He's asking for the full, inescapable personal engagement of heaven against his attackers.
Which brings us back to that tension point. How do we reconcile this intense prayer for ruin with the New Testament mandate to love our enemies?
The "you need faith in Jesus" team provides crucial balance here. David, under the Old Covenant, was the keeper of righteous order and divine law. He rightly prayed for the removal of elements that threaten the purity and survival of the covenant community. His prayer here is fundamentally different from a personal outburst of hatred. It's a theological demand that God uphold his own standard of justice on earth.
So his role was different.
His role was different, and under the new covenant, that responsibility shifts. We recognize that God is still the righteous judge, but our action is constrained by grace and the example of Christ. We're commanded to trust in God's schedule for vengeance rather than demanding immediate ruin.
That's where Paul's instruction becomes so essential, reminding us that we have to outsource vengeance to the ultimate righteous authority.
Absolutely. We are reminded in the New Testament to place our faith in God's timing. Romans chapter 12, verse 19, KJV. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord.
That means our job, when we feel that overwhelming sting of injustice, is to step back and consciously yield the case.
It does. And that forms our second application step. Practical step 2. You need faith in Jesus' team focus. When wronged, you must intentionally hand the entire situation over to God. The pain, the betrayal, the desire for retribution, the need for public vindication, all of it. Trust explicitly that he sees the injustice, knows the hidden motivations, and will bring perfect justice in his way and his time. David's fierce cry serves as a template for surrender, giving God permission to act, but not taking the execution into our own hands.
Okay, that covers the fiercely difficult part of the psalm. But now, here's this abrupt, almost shocking pivot that reveals David's spiritual maturity. Immediately after asking God to unleash the angel of the Lord, David vows profound public praise before the deliverance has even occurred. What's the theological significance of this shift from battle to benediction?
This shift is the heart of faith in Psalm 35. It signifies that David's hope is anchored not in the enemy's defeat, but in God's inherent glory. He knows God must act because God is righteous. Therefore, the victory is certain. So he can offer preemptive praise. It's the ultimate spiritual posture.
Let's hear that vow.
It involves his entire being. Psalm 35, verse 9, KJV. And my soul shall be joyful in the Lord, it shall rejoice in his salvation. Psalm 35, verse 10, KJV. All my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto thee, which delivers the poor from him that is too strong for him, yea, the poor and the needy from him that spoileth him.
All my bones shall say. That is so evocative. It's not just a mental agreement or a whispered prayer. It's a bodily, deeply felt, holistic response to God's character.
It's the entirety of his physical and spiritual existence dedicated to worship. The "You Need Faith in Jesus" team often references a similar total commitment found in Psalm 103, verse 1, KJV. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. David is committing his whole self to a single message: God is the deliverer.
And the joy, crucially, is rooted in God's salvation, not in the specific ruin of the enemies. That distinction makes all the difference, doesn't it?
It really does. It moves the focus from a transactional relationship, if you defeat them, I will praise you, to an affirmation of God's unique character. You are the one who delivers the helpless, therefore I praise you. He celebrates God's unique role as the champion of the poor and the needy. This is active faith. It's like writing the thank you note before the package has even arrived.
This practice of preemptive praise must be tremendously difficult when you're in the middle of severe suffering and betrayal.
It requires a radical realignment of focus. You are essentially deciding, while surrounded by chaos, that God's character is fixed and reliable. And this choice forms our third crucial practical application. Practical step 3. You need faith in Jesus' team focus. Practice this preemptive praise. When you bring a specific problem to God, intentionally look ahead in faith. Decide beforehand that regardless of the timeline when he delivers you, you will give him all the glory. This act of intentional worship before the manifestation of the answer strengthens your resolve and demonstrates radical trust in God's sovereignty. It moves your spirit out of the moment of anxiety and into the certain future of God's victory.
We transition now into the second cycle, and here is where the betrayal really hits with crushing force. This isn't just about political opponents, it's about former friends. David is lamenting the cruelest form of injustice, being rewarded evil for good. Let's examine the depth of the specific pain, starting with the immediate attacks on his character.
The emotional core of this section is the violation of intimacy. The enemies don't just attack him, they slander him, using lies to undermine his very foundation. Psalm 35, verse 11. KJV. False witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not. And then Psalm 35, verse 12, KJV. They rewarded me evil for good, to the spoiling of my soul.
That phrase, they rewarded me evil for good, is such a universal lament for the betrayed. It's not just ingratitude, it's active, calculated harm in response to kindness. What does it mean that this act resulted in the spoiling of my soul?
The spoiling of the soul implies not just material loss, but a deep spiritual and emotional devastation. It's that crushing blow of realizing that the generous, loving investment you made in another person has been weaponized against you. It destroys trust, invites deep bitterness, and often leads to a profound weariness.
And David really lays out that contrast, doesn't he?
He does. To illustrate this cruelty, he doesn't just state the injury. He details the immense depth of his former loyalty in verses 13 and 14. And the contrast is truly heartrending. He explains that when these very individuals were suffering, when they were sick, he mourned for them. He prayed for them, wearing sackcloth, that rough fabric associated with deep distress or calamity. He fasted, dedicating physical suffering to their recovery. And his prayer, he says, returned into my own bosom, meaning he prayed with such intense sincerity that the intercession felt as vital as if it were for his own survival.
And the imagery he uses to describe his relationship with them is just staggering. He says he behaved as though he had been my friend or brother. And then, even more powerfully, he went heavily, as one that mourneth for his mother.
This is the pinnacle of intimacy and grief. Mourning for a friend or a brother is intense, but mourning for a mother. That's the expression of profound, visceral, sacred loss, the absolute cornerstone of one's life. David is emphasizing that he gave these enemies the highest possible level of care, support, and dedication, the kind of care that only the closest family receives. Their subsequent betrayal is therefore not just an offense, it's a desecration of that sacred bond. And that deep ingratitude is what spoils the soul.
So how did these former confidants respond when David eventually found himself in adversity?
With open, malicious celebration treated as a public spectacle, Psalm 35, verse 15, KJV. But in mine adversity they rejoiced and gathered themselves together. Yea, the abjects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me and ceased not. And Psalm 35, verse 16, KJV. With hypocritical mockers and feasts, they gnashed upon me with their teeth.
The word abjects is fascinating here. It suggests, vile, despicable persons, but they were acting alongside hypocritical mockers. It sounds like an unholy alliance of the lowest elements celebrating his pain.
That's exactly right. The abjects, those generally despised or morally bankrupt, gathered in glee. And the gnashing upon me with their teeth is an image of predatory malice, of vicious, almost animalistic joy in his downfall, celebrated publicly in their feasts. The intent is not just to defeat David, but to humiliate him completely and to celebrate the undoing of a good man.
It's just so cruel.
It is. And the You Need Faith in Jesus team teaches that this profound betrayal, where kindness is met with hatred, serves a crucial prophetic role. It prepares us for the reality that walking a path of genuine godliness often invites malice, precisely because it exposes the darkness of the world. David's agony of being hated without a cause directly foreshadows the suffering of Jesus Christ.
And Christ himself confirmed this experience, right, citing the Old Testament connection.
He did. In John chapter 15, verse 25, KJV, "But this cometh to pass, that the word might be fulfilled that is written in their law, they hated me without a cause." If Christ was hated without cause, we shouldn't be surprised when we, his followers, face similar unwarranted malice. Betrayal in this sense can become a confirmation that you're on the righteous path.
Facing this overwhelming, vicious pain, David turns back to God. But this time his cry reflects a deep spiritual weariness and impatience. He asks that desperate question, how long?
This is the moment where David risks becoming spiritually impatient, yet his honesty keeps him anchored. It's so important to give space to this raw emotion. Psalm 35, verse 17, KJV. "Lord, how long wilt thou look on? Rescue my soul from their destructions, my darling from the lions."
How long wilt thou look on? That is so intense. It suggests David feels God as merely an observer, passively allowing the suffering to continue while remaining safe and detached.
It is an honest human accusation, but it's directed to the Lord, which is the key. David is wrestling in faith, not abandoning it. And the source context reassures us that this questioning of God's timeline is permissible. We see this honesty throughout Scripture, even in heaven, where the martyred saints ask in Revelation chapter 6, verse 10, KJV, "And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?"
So that question, how long, is really the cry of those who trust in God's power but are struggling with his pace.
Exactly. It's a necessary part of the lament process. However, David quickly re-anchors himself by reaffirming his commitment to praise, even while the agony persists. Psalm 35, verse 18, KJV. "I will give thee thanks in the great congregation. I will praise thee among much people."
This public promise is such a critical step in overcoming despair. It makes the vow to praise a covenant he commits to keeping, regardless of the timeline of deliverance.
Exactly. It shows the journey from emotional pain to spiritual resolve. And that journey leads us to our fourth practical step, a necessary component of wrestling with suffering, emphasized by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. Practical step 4, You Need Faith in Jesus team focus. When you're enduring prolonged suffering or injustice, it is not a sin to ask God how long. You must express your pain and confusion honestly. But immediately after asking the question, you must follow David's example. Re-anchor your soul by publicly resolving to praise him on the other side of the trial. You cry out, but you commit to worship, trusting that his silence is not absence and his delay is not indifference.
In this final climactic cycle, David returns to his plea for God to act, focusing less on the curses themselves and more on the ultimate goal, stopping the enemies from mocking his faith and trusting God. What's the spiritual and public importance of the vindication David seeks here?
The ultimate goal is the removal of shame from his relationship with God. I mean, if David, the righteous servant, is perpetually defeated and mocked, the world interprets that as proof that trusting God is futile. David needs God to intervene to protect not just his own life, but God's reputation.
Okay, let's hear the specific details of the mockery he prays God will silence, because he captures the intentional malice just perfectly.
He really does. The malice is intentional, aimed at crushing his spirit and publicly shaming his trust. Psalm 35, verse 19, KJV. "Let not them that are mine enemies wrongfully rejoice over me, neither let them wink with the eye that hate me without a cause." Psalm 35, verse 20, KJV. "For they speak not peace, but they devise deceitful matters against them that are quiet in the land." Psalm 35, verse 21, KJV. "Yeah, they opened their mouth wide against me and said, Aha, aha, our eye hath seen it."
The wink with the eye is such a human gesture, that secret knowing glance of triumph and conspiracy among the wicked, and then the shout, aha, aha, that open gloating of, we succeeded, just as we planned.
It shows the malice is both concealed and open. The wink suggests conspiracy and secret satisfaction. The aha, aha is the open, loud reveling over David's distress. It's a declaration. We got him. We knew we would swallow him up. David recognizes that this gloating brings shame upon his faith and, by extension, upon the God he serves, so he needs God to reverse the narrative decisively. He shifts quickly from describing the enemies to imploring God to take immediate attention-grabbing action.
Let's hear that plea.
Psalm 35, verse 22, KJV. This thou hast seen, O Lord, keep not silence. O Lord, be not far from me. Psalm 35, verse 23, KJV. Stir up thyself, and awake to my judgment, even unto my cause, my God and my Lord. And then Psalm 35, verse 24, KJV. Judge me, O Lord my God, according to thy righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me.
David is using the strongest possible language here, telling God, you saw this, so don't be silent, don't be far, stir yourself up and wake up.
If he trusts God implicitly, why the need for such urgent, almost demanding language? Does he truly think God is asleep or absent? Well, it's not a lack of faith in God's existence, but a desperate cry from a place of profound emotional isolation. He's trying to bridge the gap between God's known sovereignty and the current painful reality. He isn't instructing God. He's petitioning with maximal intensity, using poetic language to express his spiritual emergency. The intensity of his language reflects the severity of the threat.
But there's a key phrase in there that changes everything.
Yes, the defining request that supersedes all the frantic language is in verse 24. Judge me, O Lord my God, according to thy righteousness.
That is the ultimate submission, isn't it? He's shifting the entire burden of proof.
Absolutely. David is not saying, judge me because I'm innocent. He's saying, judge me according to your standard, Lord. Let the outcome reflect your nature. He commits his entire case, his reputation, his future, his very life, to the absolute unyielding integrity of God's righteousness. If he is found guilty, let God's righteousness be affirmed. If he is found innocent, let God's righteousness be affirmed through his deliverance.
And this submission to the higher court is the model we are meant to follow.
It is. It connects perfectly to the New Testament example of Christ. Even when he was reviled and suffering unjustly, Christ did not retaliate. He trusted completely in God's perfect judgment. We see this commitment in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23, KJV. Who, when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously.
And that brings us to our final crucial practical step, which the You Need Faith in Jesus team's study on divine integrity really emphasizes: resisting the urge to fight back against character assassination.
Yes, that's the core lesson of submission here. Practical step 5, you need faith in Jesus team focus. When your character is misrepresented or you feel that deep natural urge to retaliate or constantly defend yourself, resist it. Follow David in Christ by presenting your entire case to God, trusting him to be your righteous judge and to bring the truth to light in his own way and time. Your decision to remain silent in the face of slander and instead trust God's vindication becomes the highest act of faith.
David then concludes this final prayer against the enemy by asking that their shame be total, public, and visible, a complete reversal of that ah-ha-ha-ha gloating.
He asks for their confidence to be replaced by utter confusion and for their arrogance to be publicly stripped away. Psalm 35, verse 25, KJV. Let them not say in their hearts, so would we have it. Let them not say, we've swallowed him up. And finally, Psalm 35, verse 26, KJV. Let them be ashamed and brought to confusion together that rejoice at mine hurt. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor that magnify themselves against me.
This is a prayer for public justice to defeat private malice. He wants the world to see the fate of those who magnify themselves against the righteous. The journey ends, mercifully, not with the clash of spears or the sound of mockery, but with a magnificent communal shout of celebration. This vision of shared triumph is the spiritual destination of the psalm. What are the righteous truly celebrating on the day of vindication?
They're celebrating the visible display of God's pleasure in his servant. The focus shifts entirely from David's personal struggle to God's glorious character. It is a contagious, unified shout of joy. Psalm 35, verse 27, KJV. Let them shout for joy and be glad that favor my righteous cause. Yea, let them say continually, let the Lord be magnified, which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant.
It's so profound that the victory leads to a continual magnification of God. The prosperity of the servant is important, not for the servant's comfort, but because it proves God's favor to the world.
Exactly. When God blesses and vindicates his people, it's not merely about their personal gain. It is a public demonstration that God is just and that trusting him is the only righteous path. The prosperity of the servant is the means by which the Lord is magnified.
Then what is David's personal vow, having completed this agonizing spiritual journey from desperate military plea to confident public worship?
He dedicates his whole life, every moment, to perpetual worship. Psalm 35, verse 28, KJV. And my tongue shall speak of thy righteousness and of thy praise all day long.
All the day long. That's a 247 commitment. His tongue, which was used to cry out in pain and desperation and to describe the malice of his enemies, is now sanctified and dedicated entirely to declaring God's righteousness and praise. The final word of the psalm is praise.
This is the perfect spiritual trajectory. We bring our deepest, darkest hurts to God, and they are transformed into occasions for perpetual worship.
We've seen the 5 practical applications embedded in this text. Let's synthesize these takeaways one last time for the listener, just to show how to move from feeling forsaken to finding full confidence.
Of course, the You Need Faith in Jesus team study really emphasizes these 5 points. First, acknowledge and lament. You have permission to be honest in your pain. Cry out in that raw, visceral language of the psalm, even asking, "How long wilt thou look on?" from verse 17.
Second, you have to entrust vengeance.
Yes, recognize that seeking justice is righteous, but executing it, or demanding the specific means of execution, is God's role alone. Your mandate is surrender, just like in Romans 12:19.
Number 3 is to practice preemptive praise.
That's right. Vow your praise beforehand from verses 9 and 10. Anchor your faith in God's character, deciding to celebrate his salvation before it manifests externally. Fourth, know your champion. Lay down your weak weapons of argument and anger, and trust that the God who took up the shield and spear for David is upholding you today.
And finally, commit your cause to righteousness.
When slandered, resist that urge to constantly defend yourself. Present your entire case to God, trusting him to be the righteous judge who will act according to his own integrity, bringing the truth to light. This deep dive into Psalm 35, guided by the immense wisdom of our sources, it shows us that faith is not a passive escape from struggle. It is the conscious, radical choice to bring our deepest hurts and our fiercest cries for justice directly to the sovereign God. This psalm is a masterclass in honest prayer and active trust. It illustrates the spiritual journey from paralyzing betrayal to confident resolution in the Judge of all the earth.
Okay, let's unpack this one last time with a challenging thought for your reflection. David, living under the Old Covenant, sought vengeance through justice in Psalm 35, praying for his enemies to be shamed and brought to ruin. Yet, Christ, living under the New Covenant, commanded us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. So what does it mean for your life when you choose to fulfill David's plea for justice? Not by demanding your enemy's ruin, but by choosing to love your enemies so profoundly that their ultimate salvation becomes your highest form of justice and vindication. This is the higher ground we are called to explore, merging the fierce honesty of the psalm with the transforming love of the gospel. Thank you for joining us for this crucial exploration of Psalm 35. We hope this knowledge equips you to face betrayal and malice with profound confidence, knowing you have a divine champion.